morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yesterday, we were discussing the issue of the MDC CCC leaders selling out, why they failed to implement even one token reform in 25 years on the political stage, including the 5 years in the GNU. We have said on this platform the reason for that is that Mugabe and Zanu PF has bribed them to forget about implementing reforms. And they participated in flawed elections out of greed. For most of us, we limited our bribe to the trappings of high office, the E-class Mercedes-Benz, the generous salaries, and for Morgan Tsvangirai, the US 4 million mansion in Highlands. But information is now beginning to come out that they received a lot more than that. Apparently, most of the MDC CCC leaders received funds from Zanu PF and cash. What I would like to talk about today is one slightly different aspect of it. Are we not giving too much credit to these MDC CCC leaders that they were bribed, when in reality, the honest truth is they are breathtakingly corrupt and incompetent? They were never going to implement those reforms anyway. The question then is, did MDC CCC leaders know what those democratic reforms were, much less how they were to be implemented? To help us answer this, I would like to refer to what Ambassador Chris Dell, US Ambassador to Zimbabwe, 2004 to 2007, said about Morgan Tsvangirai. And I quote, "Morgan Tsvangirai is a flawed figure, not readily open to advice, indecisive, and with questionable judgment," wrote US Ambassador to Zimbabwe 2004 to 2007, Chris Dell, in a top secret cable to his bosses back in Washington. The cable was leaked and published by Wikileaks. He is an indispensable element for the opposition's success, but possibly an albatross around their necks once in power. In short, Zimbabwe needs him, but should not rely on his executive abilities to lead the country's recovery. If the truth be said, he was absolutely right. And time has proven him right. But not only that, Morgan Tsvangirai was flawed. One could say exactly the same thing about most of the MDC CCC leaders, if not all of them. They are flawed characters. The tragedy then for the country is it was foolish of us to trust these flawed, incompetent, and utterly useless individuals with the task of implementing the democratic reforms. So the chance came and we wasted it because we trusted individuals who were not up to the task. This is the reality that most people in Zimbabwe cannot accept or have failed to accept. And hence the reason why the country is stuck. We have got to face up to that reality because as long as we have corrupt and incompetent leaders who are not up to the task, we are not going anywhere. For some of you who may not have heard the video clip that we played yesterday, when somebody explained that the leaders, MDC leaders, have farms, I'd just like to play it to update you.
taibhadana umba wangu mana kumba kugombezera angu reriya mana sosososo but munhu asina imba atete kurara musango, so opposition inomeka sure kuti vanhu vaya vawane minda. But may he so rest in peace Tsvangirai prazi ravo vanga vainaro chamisa anaro
ane famu
kana azoramba ndoenda newe
rikupi
ane famu
ripi
I know madress munhu anetsa kuti focha but anaro chakudza off camera.
Okay,
ane mine ane makaseo.
Yeah,
yes biti ane plus aunomboona ere picture ya biti achitenga mombe kuna Temba Mliswa dzekuisa plus one of the biggest beef producers in the Matabeleland region, the Washman Ngwe.
Okay,
yes ane plus anotenga beneficiary land reform, but what they did is to discourage their people from acquiring my farms because vaidza kuti munhu akaona something chapiwa nehurumende haachapikisi.
Are you for real, Mr. Kanisha?
Nomubvunza Washman Ngwe kuti haasi kuita beef here, producer beef here.
That reality, as much as some people first of all denied that these people have got farms, that reality is beginning to sink in. We have got leaders here who one has got to question whether they really cared about implementing the democratic reforms in the first place. Did they know what those reforms were? To be quite honest, most of them did not. Because if you look at all their speeches, you'll be hard pushed to find any one of them articulating anything on what the reforms, the democratic reforms the nation wanted are. Yes, of course, they will give the usual slogans, the usual rhetoric, we want change, we are going to deliver change. They never say what change they're going to deliver. And so when they fail to deliver any change at all, it's no surprise. But what one has got to also understand here is that we, the people, have let ourselves down. Because just as much as one is saying that most of the MDC CCC leaders have no clue what the democratic reforms are, much less how they to be implemented. The truth can be said, the same can be said about the ordinary people, ordinary Zimbabweans out there. While most would understand that, yes, we need democratic reforms to ensure elections are free, fair, and credible. You ask them specifically, what reform would you want? They are at a loss. And this does not only apply to some of the Zimbabweans out there who have not had the advantage of a good education. This applies to some Zimbabweans out there. In fact, the opposition's main supporters, majority of them, have at least 11 years of formal education. 11 years. And some of them even have university degrees and professions. And yet, they have failed to define what the democratic reforms required are. Those who have, they failed to hold the opposition to account. You very, very rarely hear people asking, why did MDC fail to implement the reforms? Very rarely. That is a serious weakness. Because by failing to ask that question, they've also failed, most significantly, to realize that the GNU was the best opportunity the country had to implement the reforms. And that the MDC CCC leaders sold out. I've talked on this platform about the sheer folly of participating in flawed elections. And to be quite honest, it's not me who have identified that problem alone. Even the MDC leaders, people like David Coulthard, have acknowledged it. I've often quoted his book when he wrote that the election process in 2013 was so flawed, so illegal, the only logical step was to withdraw. And yet, he himself and his colleagues did not withdraw. And he explains it in the quotation that is showing at the bottom of your screen there. They both knew that Zanu PF was giving away a few gravity seats to entice the opposition to participate. MDCN, which he belonged to, they could not trust MDCT, led by Morgan Tsvangirai, to withdraw. And that same applies the other side. So neither side could trust the other one that they would withdraw even if they were to agree on it. And to be quite honest, both parties knew that even if the party resolution was we will withdraw from the elections, their own members would stand in those elections as independent. In other words, both sides knew that participating in those flawed elections was foolish. But nonetheless, they could not resist participating out of because each one of them was hoping they would win those few gravity seats that Zanu PF gives away. The tragedy here is, of course, that the people failed to see what was happening there, that the opposition have sold out. They were bribed with the trappings of high office and farms and cash during the GNU when they had the greatest opportunity to implement reforms. And ever since the GNU debacle, they've participated in flawed elections out of greed. I mean, when you look at some of the idiotic lies that Chamisa was telling people, that's when you realize that we have got a problem here with our electorate. People, anyone, and like I said before, the majority of Zimbabweans who support the opposition, they have got 11 years of formal education. In other words, they've got O-level qualifications. And they should know that when Chamisa said he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, that was just a lie. And this wasn't the first time he was lying to them. In 2018, it was the same thing. He told them MDC alliance has got stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And he was lying. And yet, in 2023, he repeated the same lie. Here he is assuring the nation that he was preparing to form the new government because it was God's plan that CCC would win big.
Makorokoto Zimbabwe nokuti hakuna munhu anomira kana denga raronga plan. Denga raronga plan, denga harifoiri. Plan ya Mwari haifoiri. Ini ndatanga kugadzira cabinet. There is no way we are not going to form a new cabinet. There is no way we are not going to have a celebration. There is no way we are not going to have an inauguration. Let's start preparing for our inauguration. Let's start preparing for our celebration.
Of course, he was lying. He knew, as David Coulthard acknowledges in the quotation still on the screen there, that participating in these flawed elections would only give Zanu PF legitimacy. He was conning his people to participate because he and his fellow CCC leaders were after the few gravity seats that Zanu PF was giving away to entice the opposition to participate. Even when SADC in the AU condemned the 2023 elections as flawed and illegal, Chamisa's friends insisted in taking up their gravity seats. They claimed that they had spent their own money in those elections and they took up their seats. It is said that Chamisa tried to convince them that they should not take up their seats. But you can tell that none of them listened to him, particularly since they knew that Chamisa himself had taken a lot more in bribes from Zanu PF over the years. I don't know how many of the opposition leaders knew about Chamisa having 2 farms, car sales, and having received cash from Zanu PF. But they certainly were not going to let go the opportunity themselves. And so they participated. We cannot run away from the reality that Zimbabwe is a failed state. Because in the first instance, we have got a Zanu PF corrupt, incompetent, and murderous thugs who have denied the people a meaningful say in the governance of the country. When the nation realized what was going on, the people decided that they were going to elect opposition leaders and give them the task of implementing the democratic reforms to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. At first, Zanu PF resisted it. They terrorized the opposition as well as the ordinary people. And then in 2008, when Zanu PF was forced to go into the GNU, the party realized that they could still retain the dictatorship if they allow the opposition to have the scraps. So they bribed the opposition leadership with trappings of high office, the farms, etc. And the opposition completely abandoned the whole scheme of implementing reforms. But as I've been saying here, this was not the end of the story. Because the reality is, and the truth is, our friends in the opposition were actually corrupt, incompetent, that bribing them was only maybe an insurance, when in reality, they were never going to implement those reforms. Because they are flawed, corrupt, and incompetent. We come full circle. We made the mistake of believing that the MDC leaders, Tsvangirai and company, were competent. The truth of the matter is, they are not. Just like Tsvangirai was flawed, indecisive, and when he got into power, became the albatross around the nation's neck. The same can be said about the rest of the MDC CCC leaders. And we, the people, were foolish to trust them. Even more foolish to keep on trusting them, even now when we know who they are. Many people have talked of the Zimbabwe we want. The truth of the matter is, the Zimbabwe we want will never materialize until we, the people, elect competent opposition who will implement the democratic reforms to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. Think about it. Thank you. Have a good day.